you are at the Writing While Female panel, which promises to be not at all depressing or infuriating. I am Stephanie Zvan. I'll be moderating today. I blog at Almost Diamonds on the Free Thought Blogs Network. I am a feminist online and a fairly effective one. So I have some experience with this topic. And I'm going to ask the rest of my panelists to introduce themselves and give us a little sense of their experience with the topic.
Hi, I'm Michi Troda. I am the managing editor for Uncanny, a magazine of science fiction and fantasy. I am an organizer for the Chicago Nerd Social Club down in Illinois. I'm also an organizer for the Chicago Full Moon Jams, and I perform Fire and Flow with the Rax Geek Belly Dance and Fire Performance Troupe. I write on my blog geekmelange.com about fandom and feminism and occasionally bacon. So I have also quite a bit of experience writing and talking about feminism, particularly through a lens of fandom and geek interests, but also a little bit with just general writing and publishing, and also with some performance issues.
Hi, I'm Emily Peck. I blog at alternativewriting.com. I'm part of the Blog Her network, and this year I partnered with Public Radio International with their Across Women's Lives social media campaign. I also write freelance and fiction and some web content. I mostly focus on disability issues, but I also do the intersection between feminism and disability because I am dyslexic and I'm a woman and I'm a writer, so.
Hi, my name is Miri Mogilewski. I write the blog Brute Reason on the Free Thought Blogs Network. I'm a colleague of Stephanie's. I also freelance occasionally, usually for the Daily Dot. I write about a lot of topics: psychology, mental health, social justice, feminism, sort of everything within that sphere. I've been writing while female online since I was 12 years old, so I have a lot of experience with that. And in the rest of my life, I'm a social worker.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I write while female. I'm really honored to be here at the convention this year. I'm a professional screenwriter, done a lot of TV stuff, mostly animation, and had a big run this day.
All right, before we get into really talking about the challenges of writing while female, because these can feel overwhelming, can maybe some of our panelists give a sense of how much of your experience while writing while female, particularly online, is the negative, so that we're not, I mean, we're talking about part of our experience. And I just want to make that clear from the start that this is not the whole thing.
For me, it's not a hugely negative thing. I mean, occasionally I get trolls, but I haven't gotten any online threats or anything. But it's not massively negative. It's just unexpected pop-up, but partially because I write about disability mostly.
I do get harassment and threats, but I just wanted to say I'm glad that Stephanie asked this question because it's a good opportunity to remind myself that most of the wonderful things in my life have happened in some way because of my writing. The friends I've made, the communities I've joined, the activism that I've done, all the things that I've accomplished. Sometimes, the reason I get up in the morning is because I really want to write something. So that's part of it too.
Yeah, I think I have the same experience with Miri in terms of like writing has been such a wonderful doorway into getting into all the things that I do, into being involved in fandom, into speaking at conventions, also being able to leverage my skills as a writer to help as a community organizer, because being able to articulate issues of how to run a community and basically even just putting together community standard plans and things like that. It's generally been worth any of the headaches that come with being a woman who's writing. I think it's kind of like taking a walk down a really, really nice park. Occasionally you have to look out for stepping in dog poop. But for the most part, it is a really wonderful experience that is worth, to me, has been worth the hassle. It's just unfortunate that there has to be any hassle in the first place.
Did you want to add anything?
Sure, you know, for me, I'm kind of removed from the feedback because, I mean, unless I go read the message boards, and one of the things they tell you when you write for TV is never read the message boards. But, you know, I feel like I'm pretty protected from some of that negativity. It's hard because some fandoms react differently to having a female character introduced into them or having a female writer. They might react and say, you know, whoa, 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 you know, this, I've heard women don't understand boy play patterns, and so they shouldn't write for boy toys. You know, and I, like you said, you have to realize that it's just one person who has this opinion. They just happen to have a large forum to express that opinion in. And so I think one of the best things that we can do is just say, okay, well, you can think that, and I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
I think what's really been made it possible for me to keep going is knowing that even though there's a lot of crap to deal with, and I have dealt with it, is that I'm not alone. The more that we talk about it and realize that we're not the only ones experiencing these, these kind of negative things, it's also being able to pull together a support network and people who are helping you check to realize, no, you're not overreacting to it. Yes, that was something that should make you upset. Your reactions are reasonable, feeling alienated, feeling frustrated. This is not something that is wrong for you to feel, and having people reinforce that what you're doing is worth it.
Yeah, I'm gonna very much second Mitchie on the community aspect of the rewards for this. And again, for the rewards of meeting all the people who piss off the right people. I finally got to meet Mitchie last night after like 3 years of following her online. It was a beautiful thing.
I forgot that long too. So.
I know, right? Yeah. So to put this in perspective, there is a hate forum dedicated to me and Miri and a few other bloggers. So we're talking about not an insignificant amount of negative tension, but the fact that both the topics that bring this attention and dealing with trying to make communities where it doesn't happen makes for just meeting a wonderful group of people and really getting to have the support of a great group of people. I'm just going to throw this out here as a kind of quick disclaimer. A lot of the things that we're going to be talking about do happen to men. The fact that we're talking about them happening to us as women reflects the fact that they happen more, and that it changes the character of some of the interactions that we have online to being particularly sexual, misogynistic, that kind of fun stuff. So we're not saying we're the only people who get this stuff. So would anybody like to talk a little bit about the kinds of negative repercussions in a little more specific detail? And I don't see any kids here, so if you need to quote, that's fine.
Actually, to your point about how these things happen to men, but they are different, and there's power structure. There's a story that Scott Snyder, the guy who writes Batman for DC Comics, really, really cool guy. He was on a panel with me, I think last year, and he was actually talking about how he does a lot of work as a teacher, and he started bringing some of his students into working with him at DC. And one of those students was Margaret Bennett, she's written Lobo. I think she just got onto another title, and I can't remember what it was, because keeping up with comics. But he was saying that at he had usually gotten like things from fans who were angry about stuff that he's written, like, oh, I'm gonna beat you up, Scott Snyder, or whatever. And this was something that he had just like, it comes with the territory, whatever. He's never really worried about it. He'll delete the email, whatever. He got a call in from some of his friends at the office saying, hey, you need to go talk to Marguerite. She's having a really bad day. She had just been put on, she was announced as the new writer for Lobo. The art for Lobo had been completely redesigned. Like, the character before was this big, hulking, alien biker dude, and somehow they decided to redesign the character so he looked a little bit Twilight-ish, which is something that Marguerite had nothing to do with. But he goes to talk to her, and she's really upset, and she's saying that she's gotten a ton of hate mail, and she doesn't know what to do with it. And he was sitting there thinking, like, well, I'm going to give her the speech about how this is what you have to deal with. fans who don't like what you do, and she was like, no, you have to look at the types of emails that I'm getting. And he said that was the first time he really had it brought home to him that what he gets is not what women in the comic industry were getting. There were threats of rape, there were emails saying that I know where you live, you better lock the doors at night, and all sorts of this horrible stuff. And it really is a terrible illustration of how, yes, men and women can get threatened when writing, when being outspoken, but the way those threats manifest is very, very often you're talking about women being threatened with rape, with sexualized harm, with specific, if you are a woman of color, there's that lovely little extra flavor of racism that comes in. And sometimes it's not something that people realize until they actually see A and B together, and then you can compare and realize, no, there is a very different flavor of threat that women tend to get than men do.
When you add in the disability aspect, women are already seen as less intelligent, which is ridiculous. We're over-emotional, we're less intelligent. When you add in disability, that's magnified with an additional layer of helplessness. So, as a disability writer, I get called stupid a lot, and paranoid, and I don't know what I'm talking about. It's like, well, there are studies, PRI wrote about this a while ago, where it said the different kinds of harassment that people face online, and said men supposedly get more, but women, they showed a graphic, and like the women's was way up here for sexual harassment, men's was like little tiny, you can barely see it. So the type of harassment is very disproportionate between men and women online, in person too.
Yeah, they'll always latch on to sort of whatever other identities you have. Like I write a lot about having depression and sort of dealing with that. And so of course on the forum, as Stephanie mentions, I get a lot of like psycho Miri, or like she needs to be locked up, stuff like that. But then I also get the more typical like sexual harassment and sexual threats. So some of them are like quote unquote what men would call compliments, but are really not. Descriptions of how I should be raped. Once they made an entire Facebook page that was like Miri Mogileski should kill herself or something, and it had like all these posts about how like suicide should be made legal so that I can do it. It makes no sense, whatever. And we actually had a ridiculous time trying to get Facebook to take that page down because they said this does not violate our community standards. So
this is free speech.
Yeah, I also, the other thing that I get is a lot of like weird, creepy speculation about my personal life. They always are trying to figure out like what my sexual orientation is, which is weird because I label myself queer all the time online, but they still really want to speculate. Like is she a lesbian? Should she fuck dudes? Like, excuse my language, but that's what they write.
I will keep an eye on the door and let people know if a child comes in, but otherwise I think we're okay on language.
One other thing that I get and that a lot of other women online get is a sort of like online stalking, and what they'll do is they'll collect tweets and they'll use a service called Storify to like make these entire collections of your tweets, and it notifies you when it's been added. And a lot of people have trouble understanding what the problem with this is because like the tweets are public if you don't want people to look at it. But it's like to be notified that somebody is cataloging all of your tweets and saving them for future reference. I'll get comments like, well, I'm screenshotting this. Dun, dun, dun.
I look at it as if someone is actually physically following you and taking pictures and recording video without your knowledge and storing all that.
Yeah, you walk in public also.
Yeah, I mean, you're already being recorded, so who cares if it's being collected? I care, that's creepy.
So, Nicole, you've mentioned that your experience is a little different, obviously. Do you have anything you want to weigh in on perhaps what kind of treatment you get that is different because you're female?
I'm actually feeling incredibly lucky and protected hearing these stories. I mean, that's horrible. I read about it, I know about it, but just to hear personal experiences like this that seem to be, well, I know you're saying they're not the norm, but they are the norm that they exist. You know what I'm saying? And it makes me kind of, one of the things that I see is when I see a comment online that attacks someone for being female, not really, or makes an argument that makes it sound like they're making an argument about the content of whatever's been written, but really it's about the fact that it's a female author. I always wonder about the people who don't call them on that, because if you keep reading, nobody really ever seems to call them out on that. And, you know, I've always kind of lurked online, and I have a handle that you can't tell if it's male or female, and I think that that's probably something that I've just done maybe as a coward, but also as a self-defense measure, because I feel like it's an armor to be able to call people on stuff, and they don't say, well, you're a girl, that's why, you know? And so I think there's lots to think about there. Why do we have to hide behind that? What does that mean? Why do I feel safer like that, you know? But I do call people on it, and I would encourage, you know, anybody else to call them on that too, because I think just having it persist and not be questioned is it's just the first seeds of that. You know, if we can kind of maybe call some of that to start with.
Even people who get that it's wrong on some level will be like, well, it's the internet, what do you expect? Even sometimes women, and I realize that that's a protective thing. You know, it's what we psychologists call, you know, the just world fallacy. You have to believe somehow that the world is just, and that if this is happening, then it must be somehow justified, or that's just how it is. Because realizing that it doesn't have to be this way, but it is, can be really, really heartbreaking. But you have to realize that.
I think it's also, there's the idea that, you know, it's like, oh, it's just the, you know, it's just the internet, or oh, this is the way things are online. Like, well, you can do whatever you want in your space, but if you're coming onto my blog, or if you're coming onto my Facebook page, or into my Twitter mentions, that is my living room, that is my house. I am not obligated to allow you to walk into my house, take a crap on the carpet, and then have to deal with your shit.
I think a big part of it too is it's hidden from a lot of people. Like, I mean, it's online, you can see it, but they don't realize quite how pervasive it is. I wrote something, it was a long time ago, about street harassment and online harassment and all that. And one of my male friends commented saying, well, I always stand up for women who are having a hard time. And I'm like, well, you're like one of the only 1 in 50 guys who would do that. And he goes, no way. And I told him, well, ask around, ask your other female friends, ask your male friends if they stand up. And he did. And he said, oh my God, this is terrible. I'm like, yeah. Talk to your male friends.
Well, and even when it's right there in writing on the internet, it is incredibly difficult to get people to look at this. That's a big part of what I've been doing over the last few years in terms of trying to combat harassment, is just getting people to see what is there. You know, pull out these comments, pull out these tweets that I get, pull out the people conspiring to try to get me fired from my job for writing a blog, all that kind of stuff. Actually, my favorite still is the petition to have me removed from a book, but they didn't know it was a book, which is the part that's funny.
Going to the library with whiteout.
I don't know what they were going to do, just take an X-Acto to those papers. But I have put in an immense amount of effort, and I think that is one of the reasons that I've been effective on this topic, is that I haven't let people look away. But it is a huge amount of work, and it gets in the way of doing everything else that I want to do. Back to the panelists, how do you feel about the amount of credit that you get for the work that you do?
Oh. It's really, like, I love the things that I write, and I mean, like, I've followed Stephanie's stuff, I've read Mary's stuff online, and I think one of the most frustrating things is that when you've spoken at panels, when you've written essays, and when you've been published talking about the things that you're passionate about, that you know you are knowledgeable about, it is incredibly frustrating when you see a man writing the same things, but someone who has less life experience than you do, and they may have the best of intentions and allies are great. But it's really frustrating when people will point to men writing things about how hard it is to write while you're a woman, or how hard it is to be a community organizer while you're a woman, the experiences of sexism and misogyny that women get, and men will get more credit and more notice and more signal boosting to their voices about what they've written than the women who are writing the exact same thing, who have been saying it longer, who have been saying it with more personal experience, who are very intimately involved and aware of what it is like to be a woman or to be a woman who has other intersecting identities, whether it's disability or race or gender or sexual orientation, writing about all of these things, but we are not listened to, we're not considered authorities on our own experiences unless a man is actually writing the same thing.
They're also just perceived differently. I've come across like my male friends or male writers online saying things that I've been saying for years, you know, and it's the exact same thing, but then some of the same people who won't give me any credit will comment being like, wow, this is so exciting now.
Yes.
You are a good feminist. You're not like those other people who are just yelling and getting angry. And I'm like, I wonder why that might be.
I get called a sexist a lot, which is bizarre, because I mean,
But incredibly common.
yes, it's so common, and I get called a sexist, I get called paranoid, and just dismissed in general, because I'm still not as established as these fine folks here. But still, it's very irritating when that happens.
That's why I turned off comments on the YouTube videos for panels that I had been doing, and I've only been doing this I only started doing panels at conventions in 2012. That's really only when I started. But yeah, I started seeing the comments that were going on. They were like, oh, you know, I run some panels on what it's like to be a woman in geek culture, you know, those particular themes. And it's like, these panels are sexist. Why don't they have men talking about the topic? Okay, we're just going to turn that. It's suddenly so much better when you turn the comments off.
Strange. Yeah, I'm kind of protected credit-wise because I'm a member of some guilds, you know, that have hard and fast rules that if I write the script, my name is going to be on it. But what you can see sometimes in a writer's room, and it might, I don't know if it's a male-female thing per se, but it has happened to me with some male writers, is that sometimes you'll say an idea or make a joke, and then the person next to you happens to be male will say the same idea, make the joke, and they'll get the laugh.
That is thoroughly
What's
gendered and studied.
Yes, and what that's taught me is to be very loud about what I have to say in the room. Or if somebody does pull that, I'll say, but I just said that, you guys, come on. You know, call them on that. It's back to that again, too. You know, it's scary. I mean, it's hard to be that person, and you don't want to be a jerk. That's the other thing, especially in a writer's room where you all have to work together and share a brain.
And
Yeah.
face penalties for being outspoken as a woman because
Right.
the expectation is that you won't.
We're supposed to be sweet and innocent.
But I keep going back to, like, you guys hired me for my voice. You're going to give my voice, whether you want it.
That's a little bit hard. Like, I'm pulling in the extra expectations of being an Asian woman. So they're all be like, oh, quiet and sweet. I'm like, no.
If you do have questions out in the audience, please let us know. We'll be happy to. Yes.
Nicole kind of alluded to this before. Can you talk about the temptation to, use a gender-neutral name in your online presence, or to just kind of fade from view, and how that interfaces with self-care, and how you feel about colleagues who have said, I just don't have the energy for this anymore. I'm gonna, whatever. Can you just talk about that?
Yep. First, I'll repeat it to make sure everybody hears it and it's audible in the video. The question was, how do you feel about adopting a gender-neutral identity online, or about those colleagues or the impulse in yourself to take a step back and kind of hide or take yourself out of the public eye, and how does that intersect with self-care?
I refuse to judge anybody who says that this is too much and I need to step away, because I know so many wonderful, outspoken women who burn themselves out. Because there is also, we are socialized as women to be caretakers. We are socialized to be the ones who fix the problems and do it unobtrusively and not complain while we are doing it. And that is incredibly harmful to us. I have a problem with doing all the things, and it has been, I'm 37. It has been an incredibly long and hard journey, and I'm still working on it to step away and say, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I do not have the time. I need to be able to pick and choose the things that I am involved in, that I am working on, and that is nothing. If someone says that they cannot do it, that actually can be, I think it was Audre Lorde who said that self-care is actually a radical act of defiance, something like that. I can't remember the exact quote. But self-care and stepping away and saying, I'm putting myself first, is something that women it's totally okay and actually very advisable to do.
Yeah, I get that a lot. My dyslexia, I have a hard time reading after a while and writing, so between that and the social issues and everything else, I step back for a while. I take actually 2 or 3 days off a week, because if I burn myself out, I won't be able to do anything. I can do the dishes, you know. That's it. So there's nothing wrong with taking a break.
I think that's why it's incredibly important to have that community around you too, where you know you can step back because somebody else will be there to step up and speak up while you are taking a break. You can have that constant cycle going where you are not always on the front lines. Someone will step back and help and fill in when you have to take a break.
That's teamwork.
Yeah, exactly. Women are socialized also to be pretty good at working together in teams.
Yeah.
Look at them.
I always encourage younger writers to write for themselves, and I know that sounds like such cliche advice because obviously we want our work to be read, we want people to like it, we want to get feedback that's helpful, even if it's critical. But the thing is, if you don't truly love to do this, then you'll probably burn out. If you're doing it out of a sense of duty or obligation, I think that can keep you going for a while, but what keeps you going, I think, is that guilt. And I think that's maybe that's good for the people around you, but I think it's really bad for you.
But that's something I tell people as an editor when you are writing. We are looking for pieces that have your voice, that are that have that specific thing that is you in your writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. That's why, when you tell people to write for themselves, that's actually really good advice. Because how else are you going to know that this is you unless there is a part of you in that writing?
Yeah, this is like a quick sidebar off that, but a lot of times people ask me, what about somebody stealing my ideas as a writer? I'm really worried to show people my script because I'm afraid my idea will get stolen by Hollywood. And I always say to them, you know what, the stories are all there. The main plot, that's fine if that gets stolen. What's important, what you have is your voice. How you tell the story is what's important. And that is this great commodity that we can offer with our different backgrounds. How do we tell that story?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the problems that women have when you are trying to get into writing is that you're always like, who's the audience that you're writing for? And the implicit suggestion is always, you want to write something that will appeal to the straight, white, cisgender male audience. And no, I want to write for people who want to read the things that I want to write. And there is such a diverse audience out there that, if you are writing because you feel like you need to appeal to a specific powered demographic, that's going to stilt your writing. That is a problem I've had with my own fiction, where I was regurgitating all of these epic Tolkien fantasy tropes without realizing that's what I was doing, and I kept hitting that narrative wall. I'm like, why am I having a problem with this? And I finally go back years later, look at my writing, and realize I don't have a single character of color in my fiction stories. I Mary Sued myself into all of my stories as a white chick without even realizing that's what I was doing.
To bring actually that point back to self-care, one of the things that I have been doing lately is stepping back in such a way that most of the writing that I'm doing, I'm actually getting either more pay or more credit for. And I find that is actually very protective, because I've spent a good chunk of the last, it's 4 years at this point. I mean, literally, Convergence is an anniversary on this. Crusading and trying to make things better for people who have been in ugly situations with online harassment, including myself. And so I have been writing less and getting paid more, and that has done wonders for how I feel about the work that I'm doing, amazingly enough. Also on the question of people stepping back, like Emily, I have, was it itchy? I don't remember
Yeah,
the point. I have absolutely no problem with people who are stepping back. The one thing that does happen sometimes that causes a little bit of problems is we don't give people enough permission to step back when they need to.
Yeah.
So I find that a lot of those people, in order to feel that they can step back, have to kind of put down the usefulness of the fight. Say this is hopeless, this community is hopeless, this fight is hopeless, and therefore I'm giving up. So I'm trying to work against that narrative as if it's okay, you can step back, but those of us who are fighting are still fighting for a reason, and it's a good fight.
There's also a lot of guilt involved, because sometimes, like, I got sick last month and I had to take some time off, and I just felt horrible about it. I'm like, wait, no, this is stupid. I have permission to take care of myself, but there's always guilt there, and we need to get away from that too, like the teamwork, and like what she was saying, there's always people who are also fighting, so put the guilt aside.
Yeah, to Stephanie's point, I think people feel that because self-care is such a radical thing, and because it's not what we're taught to do, people feel that either they must get themselves to a point of just such utter collapse, or they must convince themselves that the struggle is useless, like Stephanie said. And I think both of those are extremes that are bad. I think it's unhealthy to drive yourself to such a state. I think it should be okay to notice yourself starting to sort of slip and start to burn out, and at that point, sort of prophylactically be like, okay, you know what, I need to step back for a while, and then maybe you'll even be able to come back. Maybe not, that's also okay.
Yeah, I've actually taken to thanking people for specific self-care acts that they've taken.
Asking for help and learning how to ask for
Yes.
help without feeling like you are failing because you need to ask for help is such an incredibly important thing. Because especially when you are, like, if I have something on my blog, if there are comments or there's something on my Facebook page, and I'm like, guys, I know I have friends I can go to and be like, can somebody step in? I need to tag out. This is just way too much. And I'll usually get like one or two people going like, yeah, no, sure, we'll take care of it, go take a break, come back in a couple hours. If it gets really bad, we'll tell you, and then you can just, block them off your Facebook page, whatever.
I find it very helpful for friends to remind me that I have worth besides as a writer and activist,
Yes.
because sometimes, especially since this is how I made all my friends, I start to think, oh my gosh, if I ever needed to stop writing or take a break from writing, what would even be my point as a human being? And that's obviously that's not like a healthy perspective. So yeah, if you have friends who write, remind each other that this is not all you are. It's a big part of your identity, but it's not it.
Casey, you have a question up front here?
In modern feminism or transfeminism, there's the idea of leaning in to a conversation. And I, took a quick head from 3 minutes.
About half a dozen.
Hey guys.
Hi, guys.
But I think there's a tendency among women to sort of say, well, if there's a problem, either you have the problem, or why aren't you doing something to fix it? And I'm wondering if the concept of being is a toxic concept.
Okay, I'll again restate that so everybody can hear it. Asking about the concept of leaning in, so when things are difficult, putting in more effort, and the idea that this is particularly women's responsibility when things are going bad for women. Victim blaming, and also the responsibility for caretaking and fixing things falling on the shoulders of women traditionally.
I have issues with lean-in, but I know there are women for whom that works, and it is a nice reminder for them that yes, you can work hard, you can be aggressive, you can push and push, and that doesn't mean that you are any less feminine, you are any less of a woman, and that's great if it works for them. But what I have found to be something that gets overlooked in the idea that all women should lean in, or that is just all you need to do is just work harder, is that it overlooks issues of do you have a disability? Like, there are ways that white women can push and be more aggressive that women of color can't. That if you are out at the workplace as someone who is trans or if you are not. All of those things you have to keep in mind, that there is no one prescriptive way for women to get, to make more advances, to be heard more, to be treated more professionally, to get more equitable pay for the amount of work that we do. That is something that I think gets missed in a lot of those discussions about you just need to lean in more. If you have the economic resources to take those risks and push, so what happens if you lose your job because someone thinks you're an aggressive bitch and you get fired? All of those things I think you just need to be aware of, and if that philosophy works for you, that's great, but don't put it on other women that if they are not being as pushy as you think they should be, if they're not working as hard, because you have no idea what we are all doing in order to write, in order to, like, this is not my full-time job. I have a full-time job at Encyclopedia Britannica, and it takes a lot of time and energy that I'm also, I have a wonderful partner who I need to give more time and attention to, who's super supportive. I wouldn't be able to do this without him being there, but I also need to be able to allocate my time and energy, and if I was doing nothing but leaning in, I'd probably be dead before I was 50.
We need to have a balance between having all these options of feminism and activism and acknowledging each individual situation, because at the core of the matter, we're trying to say that not all women are the same, therefore not all women, not one thing will work for all women. So
the hive mind disagrees with you.
yeah, well,
Whenever
I walk against the arrows.
Whenever I think about leaning in, I think about that quote that I unfortunately don't remember who said, but it goes something like, women heard that they could be anything and they decided that meant they have to be everything. Yeah, I wish, does anyone know who said that, by the way? No? Okay. Anonymous. Anonymous. So, yeah, and the reason it reminds me of that is because the idea of leaning in comes from a truth, which is that things aren't just going to change on their own, like you're going to have to do something. But the truth is that there are, 3.5 billion women in the world. It doesn't have to be you specifically. And also there are men who hopefully we can convince to step up a little more also.
Work with us. Everybody work together.
I gotta say, I have a lot of good male support in animation. There are a lot of great guys out there that are not only, supporting female writers, but also female characters in media, which is basically, we have to start that there so kids are exposed to that and see, different women being portrayed. I was on a Korra panel yesterday, and we were discussing how great it is that there are all these different female characters in The Legend of Korra? The actual title? Yeah. And, how you shouldn't just throw a woman in, she has to represent every single thing that a woman is in an animated cartoon,
Representation matters.
Exactly. So that's just kind of a happy thought, is that, there are a lot of great guys out there, especially in the animated scene, that are working for that.
It's always nice to see places like that. Hopefully we get more of them soon. One, I think, just last thought on lean in is, my big problem with it is that it assumes a group of people who are not already very conscientious and putting a lot of pressure on themselves. And that's not the circles in which I run. People who are very conscientious, people who are trying to make everything better, are actually more in need of the opposite. I mean, you just heard us all talking about self-care and how hard it is for people to give themselves permission to step back when they need to. So it's a message that probably some people need to hear. It's not one that's gonna help me. I don't know that it's one that's gonna help anybody up here. Because frankly, many of us have exactly the opposite tendency already.
I'm gonna kind of retract back to the discussion on kind of hate mail and stuff, because in my English class this past year, we listened to a podcast from, I can't remember the one, to me, which
her dad.
Dad.
Recently, Dad's father's identity created a Twitter account with that identity to tell her how awful she was.
And just continuously harassed her, but then owned up to it in the end, emailed her after seeing and realizing kind of, oh shit, this is what I've done, because it like affected her so kind of intensely. And I remember in the podcast, they had her like on a phone call with him. So I know you guys kind of touched this already, but kind of, do you ever have instances where people like realize how badly they've messed up and like what they've done as far as like being other people? That, yeah.
So to recap a little bit, comedian Lindy West had this Twitter account put. One of the parts that I think doesn't get emphasized enough is that she interacted with this person, and she did so in a very compassionate, questioning way, which frankly with this happening had to be one of the hardest things in the world. She put in an awful lot of emotional labor getting through to this person who eventually turned around and said, oh wow, I guess you are human, I guess I'm sorry. And I frankly haven't been willing to put in that kind of emotional labor with the people who have harassed me and libeled me and that kind of thing. And it can work. And there are people who are friends of mine who will interact more or less in that way with some of these people. And if I have no idea whether they'll ever get through, but if they want to put that in and they're clear about the fact that that is what they're doing, they're challenging, but in that compassionate, questioning way, I'm cool with that.
I think it's great when people have the fortitude to put that much time and energy into talking with somebody who is basically treating you not like a human being. I personally have reached a point where I am not going to argue with somebody to get them to treat me like a human being. I don't think anybody should have to do that, and if someone chooses to, that is fantastic for them. They are allowed to draw their own boundaries and say, this is how I want to interact, and hopefully it'll make a difference, and God bless them. Go do it if that is something that works for you. It is not what Lindy did is great for her, and it's a great example of what can happen. It should not be used as an example of, well, Lindy did this with this terrible person. If you are not going to put the time into educating and talking to these people, then you are failing, which is how I've seen those sort of stories actually used, and that is not fair to everybody else.
Yeah, the other piece of that is that when she did talk to this person, she discovered, and this is something I think that a lot of us know intuitively, but this was a wonderful demonstration. He basically admitted that the reason he trolled her was because he was angry that she was so comfortable with her body, and he is not, and he was jealous, and he felt a lot of self-hatred, and he had a lot of unresolved issues, mental health issues, and sort of that's how he was lashing out. And I think that's why Lindy's story resonated with me so much, and also why I'm simultaneously so unwilling to do it, because I am actually a therapist. That is actually my work, and what she did reminded me of that. And the thing is, I am supposed to be paid for that. And I'm sorry, I know that sounds so blunt, but I'm not going to provide that for free over the internet to someone who's called me unimaginably awful things. And I also don't think that that is possible in all situations. I think it's tempting for us to imagine this possibility in which any troll could be redeemed in this way. But I'm not sure. It sounded like this man already had more self-awareness, I think, than most trolls do. And he was able to sort of reflect on himself. And I don't know if most people who graphically describe how I should be raped would be able to do that.
I tend to be very picky about who I interact with because I have been bullied pretty badly in the past, both online and off, just not really in relation to my writing. But if you're trying to lure me into a pointless argument, you're just gonna get blocked, deleted, maybe reported depending on what you said. If you actually sound halfway intelligent, maybe I'll talk to you depending on my mood, but I actually keep a folder of screenshots of why I write about feminism. So you might find yourself in a future entry if you decide to troll me, so.
There was like one instance where I got a Facebook message from a friend of a friend, like months and months and months, I think, after we, like me and a couple of other people had torn into him for pretty much showing his ass on a friend's page, just being like, but you know, this harassment isn't that much of a problem, why don't you take the time to educate people, tone argument, all of this. And the message, like, this was after Gamergate had blown all the hell up, and I got a message, just a Facebook message from him being like, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but you know, I gave you and so and so a really hard time about this, and then I got involved with a couple of groups, and I saw this Gamergate thing blow up, and oh my god, I'm so sorry for the things that I said. I never messaged him back, because okay, he wanted to get that off his chest, and that's fine. I am not obligated to give anybody a forgiveness cookie.
Absolutely.
I can acknowledge that what he did was like, that's great, he's coming to better awareness. It came at an incredible incredible expense of time and energy and just personal, all like, I don't think people understand how demoralizing and de-energizing it is to have these conversations day in and day out on the same topics over and over. They are not special snowflakes every time we come up against these arguments, and it is not something we do and then just walk away and go tra-la-la down the street. So it's, if you come to awareness, that's great. Don't expect that you are going to get a pat on the head and a cookie for being a basic, decent human being.
So I feel like you touched on it a little bit with the saying in a writer's room that a female writer will make a joke and won't at the last, the male writer will. In terms of loved ones, friends, and family that might not understand what comes with being a large white male in our society, do you have any recommendations for how you handle situations to express to a male who might work for Greenpeace and get involved in these feminist things and just might not quite understand everything that goes with that? How do you communicate that to them?
I've started telling my husband and my dad everything that happens to me, and telling them, talk to other women, so that they can actually hear it from multiple people that they care about, that, yeah, this is going on a lot. We just don't see it necessarily, because we don't talk about it in the outside world a lot. So.
I think Twitter is actually really useful for this sometimes, because there have been a lot of really great viral hashtags where women would talk about like certain experiences. And I really love showing that to men, because you just immediately get bombarded with such a list, and then you see it refresh at the top and refresh and refresh. Because you know, you might show them like the world's best, most well-articulated article, and they can say like, well, I mean, that sucks, but that's just her. And when they see this wall of tweets that just keeps refreshing, it hits them in the face, kind of like it hits us in the face every day. And another thing is, for certain people, seeing research evidence can be really helpful. And I sort of have been trying to keep like a file of like these studies that have been done that show all these effects. For instance, you know, the men getting credit for women's ideas. Also, men like talking over women in group situations, and how little women actually have to talk in order for men to perceive them as talking too much. I think that's the one that's really interesting to me.
Another?
It's kind of interesting that you bring up that your shelter being, like, I guess, in the business, while four of you are very much, it sounds kind of like independent writers. It'd be interesting to hear kind of a discussion, dialogue of, I guess, a two-way street of how can people in the industry, in that shelter area, kind of help people that are doing it. Because one question is like, how much the people that aren't sheltered, how much have you gone into writing, kind of like wanting to get into the industry, and then getting bombarded by all this negative energy, and kind of now you're just so engaged in just kind of trying to protect yourself and progress the group that you're part of, and how can you kind of work with women in the industry and kind of interact to kind of benefit both sides of it.
I've noticed an interesting, I've noticed that too, because I write copy, which is just recently safety stuff. So if you have questions about OSHA, yo. But I've noticed that, yeah, when a lot of it comes down to no one knows I'm female with my copy stuff, my copywriting, because it's staff or whatever the company I'm writing for, because I do the online copywriting. So, yeah, I've just noticed that difference. I don't really know how to.
I've seen a couple of instances where women, where people with larger platforms and who have more time will provide a buffer with women, for women doing guest posts on their blogs. Like I've seen Jim Hines and John Scalzi are two examples who come to mind. John, after kind of stepping in it in Raceville 09, had opened up his blog to Marianne Mohanraj, who's I had taken some writing classes with her, so when I saw her on John Scalzi's blog, I was like, wait, what? But she was talking about how to write, now here's the first discussion on race and what terms are when people use them, and then the second post was on writing racial characters in science fiction and fantasy. And the reason she did that on John's blog was that he was there to provide the moderation buffer in the comments, so she was free to answer questions and have a dialogue, and he was sitting there dealing with any of the negative comments and the trolls, which allowed her to actually have breathing space and to be able to interact without wasting that time and energy on dealing with people who were just there to be jerks. So I think when we can provide platforms for each other, if one of us happens to have more spoons, or if someone, like when you were in the industry, I think it sounds like your writer's room, there's some of that buffer where people are working together to be like, hey, we want you to be able to have the time and energy to put into your writing. Let us deal with pushing back against that crap for you, I guess. And like if we can work together that way, it's always, if you're a cisgender woman and you want to provide space for someone who is trans or genderqueer to write on your blog, and you can deal with ban-hammering any of those awful comments because it does not hit you the same way it would hit someone who is trans or genderqueer. We can do things like that for each other.
Thank you. I wonder if it would help to expand our understanding of what a workplace is, because kind of tying back into this idea that the internet is somehow not real, we think that the use that people get online isn't real. And I really appreciated the input of people like writers like Jessica Valenti and also some of the Jezebel writers who emphasized that this is workplace harassment. The internet is their workplace. Those websites are their workplace. I would like to believe that if someone came into Nicole's office and started hurling sexualized abuse at her, that person would probably be removed from the premises. Unfortunately, online, that doesn't often happen. And a lot of these websites freelance for that we publish for, we can't possibly moderate all the bad comments. And I'm like, okay, then shut off your comments. A lot of websites have done this. Popular Science sort of led the way. Everyday Feminism, which is a site that I get published on sometimes, also has no comments. I think that that's great. If you can't put in the time to make sure that your writers aren't being abused, then don't give a forum to abuse them. Just how nobody can just scroll right into Nicole's office and start yelling.
Chuck Wendig and John Scalzi and Jim Hines and all of these other writers have no problem saying, nope, I'm turning off the comments. I don't have time to deal with this crap today. Go find somewhere else. We should be able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, kind of to your point, is that I feel like a lot of the work that I do is within the system. Right now I'm a showrunner for a show, and I get to call on the shots. I get to decide who I hire, for instance, and what I portray on the show. And for instance, if I get a note, we had one of our female characters is a race car driver in an episode, and I got a note from from the studio saying, you should call out the fact that, there are so few female race car drivers. That's why this is so cool. And I'm like, no, we should not call out that fact. We should just show it, and this is what it is. And once you start to point to stuff like this is rare, that's ridiculous. Let's just show this is how it is. We have a biracial couple in our show. That's how it is. Nobody says anything about it. It just is. And I think that for me, I can just portray this stuff as to reflect the actual world out there. Kids watching that internalize that. you know, so that's kind of how I try to do it, you know, and I definitely talk to female writers and mentor some of them. You know, my place is not on the front lines, which you guys are facing, and I really respect that. I'm kind of more of a rebel behind the scenes.
Well, and Mary and I both write on Free Thought Blogs, which is a blog network owned by a guy. We have, no words, we have complete autonomy for what we write, except, you know, perhaps if we're going to get somebody in legal trouble, which we try not to do. We're already on that. But at the same time, the guy who runs our blog network, Ed Brayton, he gets complaints about us all the time. And it's always wonderful to know that he will share those complaints with us with, I laughed at them. And it's an atheist blog network. I was also on the board of Minnesota Atheists, and I'm a radio host for their radio show. They have been incredibly supportive of feminist dialogue within the free thought movement, and they have always been very supportive of me. So the fact that none of those institutions that I am part of are points of weakness for me, places where, you know, I mentioned that somebody tried to get me fired, or at least was talking about trying to get me fired. I stopped I stopped making political donations because of that, because you have to have your employer on those, and those get posted online, just so you know. Yeah, and I've changed employers since then, so they don't know where I work. But, I mean, we all have some various kinds of institutional support, even if it's not specifically where we're writing. So it's all kind of a spectrum, yes. And we have just a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to ask my panelists for any final thoughts, anything they didn't manage to squeeze in if they wanted to.
Actually, I have a quick question. I want to know what you guys have as a recommendation, either of a book, or maybe book and blog, or that people should read that have strong female characters. You know? Ooh. What do you like? What are you reading right now that we can recommend to me?
Yes.
I'm going to recommend Michi's magazine that she works for, Uncanny, in part because there are very strong female characters, and in part because in many of these, and in part because that's an incidental thing. That is what the editors like, and it's not necessarily about being strong, it's about being interesting and varied and having their own agendas, and that's all wonderful.
On that, some of my favorite writers right now, anything by N.K. Jemisin is amazing. Her characters are complex, and it's women who are a variety. It's not just the strong female character. It's that strength manifests in so many different ways, not just kick-ass. Cameron Hurley's books, particularly The Mirror Empire is her newest one. Also, Anne Leckie's Ancillary Sword and Ancillary Justice, both of which were nominated for Hugos and Nebulas, and Justice actually won the Triple Crown of Science Fiction and Fantasy Awards. It won the Clark, the Nebula, and the Hugo last year. Authors like Kat Valente and Alyssa Wong was the first Asian American science fiction writer to be nominated for, I think it was the best novelette in the Nebulas this year. Actually, like any of the writers we've had in Uncanny, they are amazing nonfiction writers who I really loved. Like I read Stephanie and Miri's stuff. The Free Thought Blogs have some really, really good things. I'm just all over my head. But yeah, there's some, you need to follow the I Need Diverse Games hashtag that's run by a woman. Tanya has done some amazing work in gaming and representation, so read the stuff that she has written. She had a great article on Boing Boing that you should look up. I could go on forever, so I will just let you.
I haven't been reading nonfiction lately, which is really a shame because I love nonfiction, or not. I haven't been reading fiction lately, which is really a shame because I love fiction. But I would suggest for a strong woman to read anything by Temple Grandin. She's an autistic lady. She's just awesome. And the Across Women's Lives thing has just recently officially ended, but PRI still has that webpage up, and it has some really great stories from across the world of women in all sorts of situations making a difference. So check that out.
Lately, I have been obsessed with the Steerswoman series by Rosemary Kirstein. I think, yeah, relatively unknown. But it's basically, it has two female protagonists, and they're basically traveling around the world trying to solve mysteries. It's a fantasy series, so there's magic, but it may or may not actually be magic. Really fascinating. It's really sort of science-based, very rational, very much about observing the world and trying to figure out what's going on. I also recommend it to young adults and teens.
Oh, I almost forgot Mary Robinette Cole, The Glamorous Histories. Think Jane Austen with magic.
I just read Uprooted by Naomi Novik, which I heartily recommend. She wrote Her Majesty's Dragon series with Temeraire, which I loved as well. And then Patricia Briggs is another author that writes some great urban fantasy with some awesome female characters in that. So those are my recommendations.
And technically we're over time, but did anybody have that last thought they wanted to squeeze in?
Read more women.
Yes. And pay for it.
Pay your writers. God, please pay your writers.
Thank you, everybody.